on the recorded line. But I was about to say, I was about to welcome you to the March 7th, 2022 meeting. My name is Teo Lachev. And today we've got lots of things to talk about as usual. But the first thing that I want to start with, kind of to warm you up, especially those, is anybody new to the group? Do we have any newcomers? If you can
Me,
put,
actually.
yeah, I know you, Elayne, you were new. Anybody else? Chat window, any new attendees? Anybody who hasn't come to our meetings before? I guess not to this point. But so I'm gonna go probably real quick through this things here. So our main group site continues to be the Meetup group. We also have presence at the community.powerbi.com. Looks like Microsoft is committed to kind of grow this channel as well. They started it recently, and our group is also there. What does it mean for you? Does it make sense to follow us in two places? Probably not. The same information, which is the meeting information that I post on the group site, I also put it in powerbi.com. But it's a good idea for you maybe to become part of the, I mean, you probably already have an account on community.powerbi.com. If you have ever posted questions and things like this. So if you go there and look for groups, you're going to find our group in there. So that will be another way for you to, I guess, stay on top of what's happening with our group and also ask questions, the community, any Power BI related questions. So our group, continues to be not just Power BI. We started this group more than 10 years ago with Microsoft BI. Our focus is Microsoft BI, but more and more we kind of gravitating to our Power BI as Power BI evolves. I would say maybe 80% of what we cover is Power BI related, 20% we still do some other technologies sometimes that kind of integrate in Microsoft under the Microsoft BI umbrella, like analysis services, SQL Server, and other Azure offerings, machine learning. After each meeting, it will be great if you can spread the word. If you get value from this meeting, make sure that your coworkers know, they subscribe, get notified. We're entirely complimentary group. Not only that, but when we used to meet in person, we also, as some of you remember, we used to have pizza, food and drinks. Those times seems to be long gone. Hopefully soon we'll get back to it, see what's going to happen with the policy at the Microsoft office, see where we can get in person again. If you want to get more involved, meaning if you want to present, if you want to, I guess at this point, I'm always looking for good presenters. If you have like a presentation, 1 hour presentation on some Power BI topic, please let me know. We also, at this point, I typically also give the opportunity if someone has any Microsoft BI related job openings to tell us about this. Is anyone looking for BI talent? Do you have a job opening that you want to share with the community? Anybody?
Hey, Teo,
Okay.
I'll go ahead and throw this out. This is Preston. I'm with Improving Atlanta. If anybody is looking for something in particular around the data engineering or BI development side, just let me know in chat. We can discuss offline. Don't want to take any more time than that. Thanks, Teo.
All right. That was Preston from Improving Atlanta. Anybody else looking for having anything? If I mean, don't have to announce it on the microphone. You can post it on the chat window. Just drop the announcement in there, and hopefully we'll get some traction. On the event side of things, nothing terribly exciting coming up, in near time that came on my radar. The Georgia Technology Group, the Tech Summit is going to be April 26, 27. There's going to be some technologies, interesting technologies out there. I want to check it out. That's the only thing that kind of caught my interest. Does anybody have any other announcements, or does anybody know of any other events related to Microsoft BI that might be worth mentioning?
Hey, Tio, I have some jobs for my company. I will share in the chat once I found this link. This is Lillian from Fulton County School System.
Right. Nicely. Nice to hear from you again. Yeah, the chat window is right there on, I guess, the second icon on the top in my case.
Yeah, so our school have two openings for analysts. The job title is called Program Evaluation Analyst. But so we have Power BI Premium, and it's a government organization. So we have very good benefit plans. It's a full-time position. I'll be posting the link for the job application in chat for pass it along to whoever who is interested. And I will also post my contact information so you can contact me. That's it. Thank you, Theo.
Awesome, Lillian. Great. Something that I forgot to mention is that those of you who just join us, typically people asking, where can I find the recordings from these meetings? So this URL here, and actually I posted also in the chat window as well, is the one that you can go to. That's going to bring you to YouTube, where you're going to see our channel. You're going to see all the videos since we started recording them at the beginning of the pandemic, right? So it's in the chat window too. So on the next thing on the agenda will be kind of a little bit what's happening with Microsoft BI latest and greatest since the last time we met, which was 7th of February last month. If you want to know where, oops, actually this one looks like I did not update them. Bad tail. All right, so this actually was from the last time, but still good links. And I'm going to actually tell you about the new announcement. So let me just tell you briefly about this. If you want to know where Power BI is going, we have Power BI release plan. So Microsoft, one of the things that I like about Power BI is that it has a public roadmap, near term and long term. So if you are to search for Power BI release plan, and right now the latest one is 2022 Wave 1, you're going to see the new features that are coming up broken down by Power BI Desktop, Power BI Service, Power BI Embedded. So please feel free to check it out. So the rest are old news, but something that came out in the February release of Power BI Desktop, and something that I'm going to show you in a moment that I'm a little bit excited about is something called dynamic query parameters. Actually, we have enhancements in dynamic query parameters that now make it more useful. So I have a little demo that I'm going to show in a minute. So today, our main presentation, before I do that, is going to be migrating Azure Analysis Services models. Also, we call those semantic models to Power BI Premium. So Elayne Jones is going to show you, is going to talk about pros and cons. I'm a big fan of actually moving these models, semantic models, to PBI, so I'm looking forward to it. The next meeting is going to be April 4th. We are planning Michael Carlo, who is a Microsoft Power BI MVP, to come up and tell us about the, we'll see what he's going to talk about. It's TBD at this point, but I'm sure it's going to be good. And with that, I would like to just jump to a little demo here about dynamic query parameters. So before that, I want to point you to a blog that I recently posted that actually gives a little bit more information, a little bit more context. I put it in the chat window about dynamic query parameters. So imagine this scenario. You are, and this is something that people have been asking for quite a while in Power BI, and so far the answer has been, we can do it. But imagine you have a store procedure or a free SQL statements that you want to execute in direct query. So when the user changes a slicer, you want direct query to fire or a store procedure to be executed. And you want to pass the selection. You want to pass what the user actually has selected as a parameter to that store procedure. And this is a very popular. Now, reporting services actually, since its very beginning, actually could do this scenario. But Power BI so far wasn't capable of doing that. And the reason for this is that, Power Query and the model, you can think about those things as two different universes. They actually can't talk to each other today. The only way they communicate is Power Query to send the results from the query back to the Power BI model when you import or indirect query. And that was pretty much it. So it was kind of one directional relation between Power Query and the model. And the model itself couldn't pass anything to Power Query. In the normal case, when you import data, that really is not a big deal. But in direct query, when you execute a store procedure or a freeform SQL statement, there are many interesting scenarios where you want that to happen. And in this case, we have a store procedure. It takes a parameter. I want to execute it every time the slicer changes so I can see the results of the store procedure on the left side. So this store procedure that I use for this demo is nothing terribly exciting. Basically, it's based on a store procedures we have in the AdventureWorks 2019 database, but I kind of changed it a little bit because I wanted to experiment with a few scenarios. And by the way, in my blog, you can download this demo that I'm showing in Power BI Desktop, as well as the store procedure. But the idea here is that the store procedure takes a parameter, which is the email, the login of the user, email address, and it goes and does some stuff. And eventually it returns the employees that report to that manager. Again, what the store procedure does is really not important here. The important part is how we can achieve this today, given this new feature in Power BI. So you are probably familiar. So let's go actually to the, before that, let me just show you what the model looks like. It's very simple. I have an employee table, which actually drives this slicer. This email address comes from a list of employees. That table is imported. That's it can be imported from anywhere, but it comes from the same database. And then I've got this second table called Get Manager Employees, which is configured for direct query, and actually that table returns the results of the store procedure. So if we have to start with the end result in mind, how does that work? I'm picking here an employee. The store procedure is executed in direct query, and it shows me the results. I change the employee, a refresh happens. I go to this last guy here. This is all the employees that report to him. So the store procedure being executed dynamically every time the parameter changes, and I'm passing the email of the selected user. So how did I get this to work? Well, let's go and jump to the Power Query behind this model. So the first thing that I did is to figure out how to call a store procedure in direct query. Actually, I have a blocks long time ago that I've written, and it's still, there is a kludgy workaround that we need to do, because if you just go to Power BI today, and if you go and say, I want to connect to SQL Server, and you say, well, I want the results to come from a store procedure, and you do exec, the store procedure and the parameter. The interesting part is that this is going to work in Power Query. The Power Query is not going to complain. But the moment you return back to Power BI Desktop, Power BI Desktop is going to throw an error, because what it's trying to do is trying to create a wrapper select statement on top of your select statement, which is exec store procedure parameter, and then this doesn't work. So you're going to have a syntax error, and that's going to be pretty much the end of your attempt. So the way to do that is to use open role set or open query in SQL Server, so that we can wrap this execution of this store procedure. This is the store procedure right here, that we're executing. So we have to wrap this awful hack here into open role set and open query just to get this to work. And then, as you can see, we also parameterizing the store procedure. So we have a query parameter called login that I've created. You guys probably familiar with query parameters so far. I typically use them to change connection strings. Let's say if I move from development to production to QA, and I want to change the server name and the database name, I typically use parameters. But so far, these parameters have been static, meaning that I cannot pass what the user has selected when they ran the report to the parameter. So now, though, what this parameter does, this is the parameter that I'm going to use to pass the email address of the user that I'm selecting. So I'm wrapping this in this get manager employee, and everything works in Power Query. So great. So now that we've done this, the next step will be to figure out how to bind the slicer to the parameter. So this is where the tricky part is, and this is where this new enhancement comes in. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to the diagram view, the model view, and I'm going to go to the email address column of the employee table. This is what drives the slicer, and that's what I want to pass to that login query parameter that I showed you before. So the new thing here is that if I look at the properties of that field, now we have what? Now we see that we have bind to a parameter property. So that's the big difference. So dynamic query parameters, just to give you a little bit history, actually, they came a few months ago. But when they initially came, Microsoft only supported what we call managed providers in Power Query. So those will be things like Google BigQuery, Custo in the Microsoft world, some services that Microsoft have actually created a Power Query connectors from scratch. But relational databases like SQL Server, Oracle, and so forth, they were not supported because the connectors that Power Query has are just wrappers on top of this, on top of the managed providers, let's say for SQL Server that Microsoft has. And because of that, this just didn't work, but now actually it works. So we use that property, we bind it to the login parameter, and that's pretty much it. So now when I go and when I start creating reports, every time I change the parameter, the stop procedure is going to be executed. So what are the pitfalls? So if you read my blog, I almost got excited about that feature. But we have limitations as usual. So what about if you want to bring, so this actually, recently I had a real life project where a large ISV, they already had a security infrastructure built in their database. The only thing that we had to do is to pass, let's say you have like a entry store procedure, you pass the identity of the user, and then the security framework figures out what permissions the user has and what needs to be returned. It was kind of complicated thing, kind of an old-fashioned way of doing things. Now we use row level security, but that's what they wanted to do. So Can we extend this scenario a little bit further by saying that instead of, well, this email addresses, they may come from the database, but ideally, if I want this to be security driven, I want to use a DAX measure. And in DAX, we have a user principal name that returns the identity of the interactive user. So ideally, I don't need that slicer at all. I just want to have user principal name. I want to be able to bind that to the login parameter. But unfortunately, this still does not work. And the reason why it doesn't work is because you cannot pass DAX measures, the results from DAX measures to Power Query. So any type of a measure that you have user principal name or something else, just it will not work. You cannot pass it to Power Query. So this scenario is not going to work. The other scenario that doesn't work is that this field that you bind to the parameter, which means this my email address in this case from the employee table, that's the one that the slicer needs to show to the user. So I also experimented, what about if I want to put the user full name, not the email address? And there is one-to-one relationship between the full name and the email address. So why can that work? Well, it doesn't work. And the reason why it doesn't work is because cross-filtering of any flavor, cross-filtering on the report, or if you put like a full name parameter here and you click it, it just doesn't work. So the field that you pass into the store procedure, it has to be the one that you are you actually allowing the user to change. So for me, those are big limitations. For you, my work, depends on your scenario, may not be a big deal. But the good thing at least is that now we can pass dynamically parameter to a free-form SQL or a store procedure. And we got some questions. So let's see. I'll have to catch recordings, but looks interesting. All right. Bruce, can I publish data source also have this binding? Can I publish data source? What do you mean by publish data source, Bruce?
What almost entirely we publish our data sources and then we just attach them to a.
Oh, I
Yeah.
see. So basically what you're asking, if I have to rephrase your question, if this is a Power BI data set
Yes.
that is published to Power BI, and if I go here and if I connect to the Power BI data set, can I then use dynamic query parameters? And I believe the answer is no. I haven't tried. I think this enhancements applies only to relational databases. We got to read the announcement here, which we can do real quick, but I think they only, so it's a manage providers in Power Query and relational databases. Let me just take a look at the announcement. Power Query. This is date with feature summary. So this is where this thing is. Dynamic M query parameters now support SQL Server and more data sources. So we have a TSQL-based sources, which is all the flavors of SQL basically, which is good. Oracle, Teradata, data flows, SAP. So I believe the answer of your question will be no, but you can try it and see what's going to happen, I think that's going to work because it's like connecting to analysis services and it's just not going to work, I believe. Any other questions? Is this screen being shared? Somebody's asking. The screen itself is being shared. I hope you guys can see it. The meeting is being recorded. Okay, all right. No more questions. All right, well, That was from me. And now I would like to invite Elayne, who is our main presenter today, to tell us about how we're going to convert the pros and cons of converting semantic models to Azure. Elayne, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Teo. I'm going to use this present in Teams button, so bear with me while it loads. Let me know. Can you guys see it?
We can sit.
Great. Hey everyone, my name is Elayne Jones, and I'm going to be talking about migrating your analysis service instances over to Power BI Premium. Thank you all for having me. It's great to be here.
Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, no problem. So just a brief overview of kind of what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to give a brief introduction to myself and the company I come from. I work at BlueGranite, and I'm going to talk about just the overall benefits of migrating over to Power BI Premium. But I'm also going to cover some potential drawbacks or some potential reasons where you might not want to migrate over, just depending on your organization's specific needs. And then finally, I'm going to give like a brief layout of the different options you have for deploying your models over to Power BI Premium. And that's what I mean by migration proper. Just a little bit about me. I'm a solution consultant here at BlueGranite, was recently promoted actually from a staff consultant, so that's exciting. I have a lot of expertise using data visualization and modeling in Power BI, and some experience querying data and using Power Query and DAX. And something I'm really passionate about is creating blog posts here at BlueGranite and kind of, bridging the gap between IT and business users as best as I can. That's what I'm really passionate about. Previously, I worked as a data analyst at UPS Supply Chain Solutions. I'm based in the Atlanta area too. So if you guys are familiar with UPS over on Morris Road, that's where I started everything. And you guys actually might know my dad too. His name is Stacy Jones. I think he's presented at this group before. So just fun fact.
We know Stacy Jones very well.
I know you do, Teo. Just a little bit about BlueGranite. We're a remote data consulting firm, but we have employees all over the country, and we're based in Michigan. We've got just under about 100 data architects, data engineers, and analytics specialists. And we combine our technical depth with industry experience to kind of understand our clients' specific needs and guide them to understand their data and to represent it best. And we are a Microsoft partner, so we specifically handle Microsoft related technologies, but we also have, a wide range of expertise within our company. We service a few key industries, and those are education, financial services, health and life sciences, manufacturing, and retail and government. We have lots of different services, so we go end to end with our solutions. So we offer things to deal with Power BI adoption and training, but also maintaining your solution and implementing a framework to improve time to value for your clients and launch solutions that are not only just well architected, but are built to last. That's something we really focus on in our company. And I'll share this presentation after I finish speaking, but I've got some links. Feel free to contact me on LinkedIn if you want, and I'll also link to the blog post that I've written about this so you can reference it if you'd like to. All right, so just a brief kind of lead into why are we talking about migrating your analysis service models over to Power BI Premium? So for a long time, analysis services was like the prime enterprise semantic layer. And it was meant to be this basic layer to be used with reporting tools like Excel, SSRS, and Power BI. But, more and more, there's just increasing demand for getting more out of your report. So when people are wanting things that are scalable, they're secure, they're easy to go in and work with and manage. They want it to be available to all the users in their company, at the drop of a hat. And more than anything, everybody wants their reports to be visually appealing, modern, clean, sophisticated, and responsive and interactive, not just pretty, Power BI datasets actually leverage the same Vertipack engine that analysis services tabular models are based upon. And so that just, like, basically when you open up a Power BI desktop file, you're also opening like an instance of analysis service. So it's kind of signaling the shift to Power BI as this new layer for your data. Power BI is evolving as like a one-stop shop for all kinds of business intelligence functionalities, bridging the gap between self-service reporting and IT managed business intelligence so that you don't have to do this yourself. It will simplify that workflow for you. So here you can see there used to be a really big disparity between the features of analysis services and Power BI. But more and more, Microsoft is pushing Power BI as a superset of analysis services features. And when I say a superset, I mean, kind of like you can see with the visual here, like it's taking everything that was great about analysis services and just blowing it out of the water. So everything you knew and love about analysis services, Power BI Premium could do it. And I'm going to kind of cover several of these bullet points here because they're really expansive, as you can see. So lots of the first semantic level capability that used to only be in analysis services that is now in Power BI would be calculation groups. And I am a really big fan of using calculation groups. I don't know if you guys have ever tried them out before, but they are really, really slick. So say you have like some kind of common logic that you want to implement across your organization. Say you want to be able to measure like average sales, average unit price, all these things by year to date. But the way that you calculate year to date is the same across all of these measures. You don't want to have to go in and create a separate year to date sales, year to date unit price for each one of those things. You just want to be able to come in and say, I want to see all these things year to date. With calculation groups, you can do that. You can open up this external tool called Tabular Editor and come in and define calculation groups that will say, come take this selected measure and apply this same year-to-date filter for all of those. And then you can throw that in your visual and you don't have to create, all of these hundreds of measures in your model, and it makes your model so much easier to navigate and maintain. Because say something changes about the way you calculate year to date, you only have to change it in the one place in the calculation group and not all across your model. Another semantic capability would be perspectives. And so when I say perspective, I mean that's a defined, focused view of your data that is business specific. And that's now included in Power BI Premium as well. So that just makes it even easier for your users to access your data because they're only having access to the content that you want them to see and that is relevant to them. Another capability now in Power BI Premium is metadata translations. Power BI Premium can support, multiple different foreign languages, and that just further creates this unified model for you. I mean, you wouldn't have to come in and create a separate sales dashboard for Spanish users or for French users or what have you. You all can use these metadata translations to centralize all of that. And that's going to be really important for companies who have, foreign assets or just, wide ranges of users within their own company that they need to service. Another capability now included in Power BI Premium would be object level security. So you can restrict access to tables and columns that have sensitive data down to the object level. And you can just fine tune, control who has access to what data. And so you can manage security across your organization in a unified and clean way. Another feature would be backup restoring. And so with Power BI Premium, you don't have to worry about, oh, is my Power BI report going to be available if there's a disaster or if there's a sudden outage. You can rest assured that there's a backup available for your model and you won't have to repeat your work by coming in and duplicating it later. Another feature would be asynchronous refresh. And so what I mean by that is you can invoke a batch commit to come in and refresh your data. So you don't have to sit there and manage, oh, this is my data being refreshed or not. With Power BI Premium, you can let all that workflow be pushed upon the Power BI service and refresh like that. I think, a lot of this can be encompassed by just the innovative nature of Power BI Premium, because new features are just being released constantly. I mean, you saw it from Teo's presentation just today. Every month, Power BI, Microsoft is adding new features to Power BI Premium that they're just not adding to the analysis services models anymore. And so if you shift over to Power BI Premium, you can leverage all of these new capabilities as they come out and stay really up to date and on top of it with the capabilities in your reporting. And you can integrate with your other Power BI assets that you already have. And so, like I was saying, Power BI Premium can be your one-stop shop for everything. You can implement incremental refresh or use new things like deployment pipelines, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about later. And so everything's all in one place, easy for you to manage and maintain. In terms of security and governance, Power BI, you can also integrate with other featured Microsoft programs like Purview, and you can unify the data governance across your organization and make sure everybody's on the same page. Everybody is defining their business terms in the same way and make sure everything, is just, we're all on the same page, because we don't want, say, like finance to be defining how they calculate something differently. I mean, that just, I'm sure you guys have worked with, things like that before. You want to decrease that as much as possible. Another note about security is Microsoft information protection labels, in that all the artifacts that have the label will inherit the label. And so that means like apps, reports, Excel pivot tables will all inherit the label from the original source. And so with that, you can clearly define security within your organization, define like these things are sensitive and these are not. Make sure nothing's creeping between departments if it doesn't need to be. And you can just really maintain security really well with Power BI Premium. In a similar way, you can also certify data sets, and that is going to be a really huge step forward in promoting that single source of the truth. We've all heard that phrase, but I mean, certifying a data set, if you say this is the data set we want everyone to use, that just further drives home the fact, like, this is how we want everything to be calculated. And this is how the reports are going to be, guys. You got to wrangle everybody in. with multi-geo deployment management in Power BI Premium. You can address regional specific security requirements. And what I mean by that is like you can deploy to data centers other than your home Power BI tenant and say there's like some kind of specific security requirement within that other geographical area. You can come in and manage that all in one place with Power BI Premium, and so you make sure your content is going to be available even if there's some kind of different security requirement there. And you don't have to reset the gateway connections each time you move geographies, and those geographies could be like more than one region. Another feature to note would be the bring your own key. And so Power BI, it encrypts data that's both in rest and in process. And you can come in and bring your own key for data at rest that's being used as a data set. And that just allows you to be able to meet any kind of specific compliance requirements within your organization and be able to still leverage Power BI Premium, even if you think your organization might not allow it. I've listed these as kind of my top favorite premium features, if you will. I think one of the main things is the larger data set size with Power BI Premium. With Premium per user, you can store 10 gigs per user, and Premium per capacity can store 100 terabytes. And when you migrate over to Power BI Premium, you leverage the storage within the Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2, which is like the premium storage, you guys. And Premium can actually scale up or down based on the changing needs within your business. And I'm going to go into that a little bit more in a minute, but just know that you can scale to like petabyte level with Power BI Premium. And you can also leverage composite models and aggregations and really take advantage of the robust scaling opportunity with Premium. Another Premium feature would be data flows. And so with the data flow, that's a self-service data prep process. And that is another step in creating like the single source of the truth within your organization. So basically what a data flow is like if you've ever used Power Query, it's like the same thing, but just in an online interface. And what you do there is you bring in your data and you perform transformations upon it, and you publish that up, or you use it, publish it to the service, and then multiple different reports and come in and base their data off of that data flow. And so what that would mean is like all your users reporting could be based upon the single data flows transformations. And like I was saying before, that just means everybody's on the same page. We're all using the same data transformation logic. And with that, it's going to make sure all your reporting is uniform and makes sense across your organization. And, similarly, you'll be able to just come in and make changes just on the data flow, and those changes will flow through to the other assets accordingly. With paginated reports, I've got a couple of shameless self-promos here when I share this with you. These are 2 blog posts that I've written on paginated reports and deployment pipelines, if you're interested. But paginated reports are going to be a key feature for those users who have a lot of SSRS reporting within their organization. And so it's basically the same process as using SSRS, but using Power BI, and it's more streamlined and a lot sleeker in the Power BI Premium service. And if you have your paginated reports with Power BI service here, it's like I said, you can come in and make a change here and it will just be all unified in this one workspace. You don't have to go to a bunch of different places to come do all of your reporting and everything. It can all be based on the same data and can all be uniform. That's like the goal here is we're all trying to bring everything together, get everybody on the same page, make everything much easier to maintain. Another feature would be you have to call out the AI capabilities with Power BI Premium. I mean, let's just be real. Artificial intelligence is cool, you guys. More and more users just want to be able to have their reports be not only explanatory, but predictive. Like with Power BI Premium, you don't have to go and get an advanced data science degree to be able to come and have sophisticated models that intelligently make predictions based upon your data. You can leverage AI visuals directly within Power BI Desktop and really impress your users and drive home really impactful business decisions. I mean, your users may just be asking you to display some kind of metric in your report, but what if you could give them more with that, with your data? You can come in and implement like a auto ML model visual within your report and be able to give them so much more out of their data. That's what we want to do as report developers. We want to be able to impress our users and drive business decisions in a new way that they haven't seen before. And with deployment pipelines, that's another feature I'm going to talk about here. That's just a way of kind of bringing this all home together. We can have like a development, test, and production stage for each workspace, and we can easily view differences between the workspaces and manage all this content has been changed in dev to test, and we can easily overwrite any difference, and we can just have a very easy way to maintain everything across our organization and to make sure, once again, everything is uniform and consistent. And you can't talk about Power BI Premium without talking about the XMLA endpoint. It is really, really astounding what you could do with the XMLA endpoint. Before, with analysis service models, you could only access the data in Excel or other reporting, very basic reporting. But with Power BI Premium, you can use something called the XMLA endpoint. It sounds fancy, but that's basically just a way to connect to lots of different external sources. You can use lots of enterprise tools directly against the Power BI data set. And you can get it by coming in and enabling at the tenant level the XMLA endpoint, and then for each workspace, you come into the settings and it's listed here as this workspace connection. And you can once you use that, you can connect in a variety of different services and not just have access to the data set, but it allows you to have more complex lifecycle management with your data and different authoring capabilities and debugging and monitoring capabilities as well using this endpoint. And when you connect using the endpoint, that's a live connection to your data set. So once again, if something gets changed in the data set level, it will also get changed on the artifacts that are connecting using the endpoint here. And something really cool you can do with the XMLA endpoint is connect using service principals. And doing that, you can automate operations like provisioning your workspaces or deploying models and refreshing your data set. So you can focus on something else while that's going on in the distance. You don't have to sit here and monitor all these little things. You can have it be automated for you. here's a little, just an overview of a couple of different things you could connect using the XMLA endpoint. You can use SSMS, and you can write DAX queries, MDX, and XMLA queries against your data. And when you use SSMS, you can really get down to the fine grains of your data. You can do refresh options and partitions and manage it very specifically using SSMS. Similarly, you can use SQL Server Profiler to debug problems in your data set. That's an installation on top of SSMS, and it allows tracing opportunities. Another feature another service you can connect to would be Azure DevOps. You can come create pipelines and promote the continuous integration, continuous delivery across your organization. So for example, you could schedule a pipeline to schedule off other multiple refreshes of your data. And a favorite of people in my organization would be DAX Studio. You can use this to write DAX queries against your data and format them, and you can get down to performance tuning and analysis. So say you have a visual in Power BI desktop, you can come in and refresh that visual and get the DAX query behind it, and you can throw it into the DAX Studio and run the query and view the execution stats and see like, oh, this visual is taking 100 million seconds to load. Why is it taking this long? And you can come in and see the query and see how you can fine tune it to optimize performance for your reports. In a similar way, you can use Tabular Editor, which is an external tool I mentioned earlier, and you can create measures and maintain your tabular model using the Tabular Editor. Similarly, another really good feature would be ALM Toolkit, and that's an external tool within Power BI Desktop that you can use for comparing dataset versions. And some other things, of course, you can still connect using Excel pivot tables and Power BI Desktop and Power BI Report Builder. There's even options to connect with Tableau. And like I mentioned a little bit earlier, Power BI Premium is going to be a really key for auditing and monitoring the life cycle of your reporting within your organization. When I say auditing, I mean you can get an overview of the resources and the users and the objects within your tenant. By monitoring and auditing content in your organization, you can understand the growth of your reporting. You can understand like who's using these reports, and you can come in and control the sprawl, make sure data is not creeping organization departments if not needed. You can get an overview of like what are people doing within my tenant. You can monitor usage patterns and trend analysis. And it'll, with Power BI Premium, they have capacity metrics apps and usage report metrics apps for your data. So you can be able to answer questions like, what are my most used reports? What are people doing within those reports? Are they exporting the data, or are they just viewing the data? Or can really spark conversations about governance and security within your organization if you monitor these kind of things. For non-premium users, you can only get very high-level data through the admin portal and the usage metrics there, and that's just a very high level. But with premium, you get a much more detailed view of the activity, and that includes things like CPU usage, like number of active users, memory, refresh details. And with the XMLA endpoint that I described earlier, you can monitor your performance using external tools like SQL Profiler and DAX Studio, and be able to monitor, you know, like performance wise, this is why this report is taking so long. And if you can, once you can start to, like, excuse me, let me start over my thought here. But if you can come in and create all these reports all day long, but one thing, if they're not performing well, then that's not really completing the task. You know, if your users are taking forever for their reports to open and load, and they're not happy with it, then you're gonna experience, you know, decreased confidence in the tool overall, and people like I said, we want our reports to be fast, responsive, and so if you can come in with Power BI Premium and use the XMLA endpoint or use these more detailed usage metrics, you can start to answer these questions and really impress your users. I think at first glance, some people might be hesitant to shift over to Power BI Premium just because they're afraid of the cost that would be associated with it. But I actually find that it's more cost effective especially for bigger clients. And so it's actually, you know, okay. With a pro license, it's like $10 per user per month. And with a pro license, you can share reports across your organization. And a premium license includes all the features that you get with a pro license. And premium per user is $20 per month. And I usually, for my clients, only recommend premium per user as like a low cost entry point to be able to eventually shift over to premium per capacity. And that could be initially like removing a barrier that would cause you to migrate over to Power BI Premium. But per capacity, the prices start at just under 5,000 per month. But like I said, you can enable auto scaling with your Azure subscription, so that will dynamically auto scale your capacity according to usage within your organization. And so that dynamically responds to changes in, you know, demand and unplanned spikes within your organization. And you can come in and preset that limit so it doesn't just like completely blow you out of the water 1 month or something like that. But with the premium per capacity, if you have a lot of read-only users, so I'm talking like more than 500, that's really going to be more cost effective in the long run, because you're charged based on your usage. You don't need to pause servers when they're not being used. You don't have to come in and manage data set refreshes across your capacity. So I think you'll find really it is more cost effective in the long run. And while I've said all these things that are so great about Power BI Premium, I recognize that it's may not exactly be the case for every single organization. So I'm going to cover just a couple of potential drawbacks of migrating. I think the biggest reason perhaps not to migrate over Power BI Premium would be security. And so if you have an organization that has very strict data governance and protection requirements, migrating to Power BI Premium might not be recommended, because there could be some potential differences with Microsoft's data protection standards and your organizations. What immediately comes to mind would be something to deal with, like healthcare has very strict regulations sometimes, and some financial, like banking, could have very strict security requirements. And once you move over to Power BI Premium, your data is technically now in the hands of Microsoft, which is of course an external party, and there could be some risk there if you really need to. And here I have a couple of screenshots as kind of illustrate my point here, in that you lose the full admin power over your data when you migrate over to Power BI Premium. With Analysis Services model, you had access to all kinds of DMVs and content level security settings that are just not available in Power BI Premium. So like I'm showing on this top left picture here, in SSAS, you can assign a true administrator to the analysis service model, and you have complete full admin power over everything in that model. You could come in and do things like making separate login rules that don't require Active Directory authentication. And you can also come in and control your data and your job executions at a much more granular level than in Power BI Premium. So in this second picture here, I'm showing that, there are certain DMVs that are not at all in Power BI Premium. So like one we came across was the Discover Connections command is not available in Power BI Premium. You can't run it because you're not the true admin over Premium. And once the data set is on the Power BI Premium capacity, the data sets are stored in analysis service models in the WABI data clusters. That Microsoft owns the WABI clusters. You only have read and write permissions over them. And so organizations that have finite detail logging or use link services with their analysis service models now, they might lose that capability because they're not the true admin over that model anymore. Like I said, Microsoft is now. So that's why I think the security is probably the main reason not to shift over. There is, still some parity in the features between analysis service and Power BI Premium. So organizations that want to keep their main data warehouse on premises may just want to continue using their existing on-premises reporting applications, things like SSRS, rather than shifting everything over to the Power BI service equivalent like paginated reports. Another thing to note is that Power BI Premium does have a requirement for a strong and consistent network connection. So some organizations just might not have the speeds or the consistent network connection needed to leverage Power BI Premium in full. Like I know just off the top of my head, one of the clients I work with is based in like a very hilly area in North Carolina, and they say that, due to the service network outages and everything, that happens so frequently that it's just easier to keep everything on premises for them. So that could be something to consider potentially. And like I mentioned earlier, there is cost, of course, associated with migrating over to Power BI Premium. And I think just the fundamental difference in the way that licensing is set up between analysis services and Power BI Premium could be an important factor to consider before migrating. So, for example, analysis services has fixed monthly costs, whereas Premium has fixed monthly costs per user for, the per user version. And so, or per capacity. So that's not exactly apples to apples comparison there. Analysis services is based on 3 tiers, and those tiers are developer, basic, and standard. And within each of those tiers, the price varies by the processing power and the memory size for each of those. And Power BI Premium is either per user or per capacity. When you pay per capacity, you only pay for as much capacity as you need. So, like I said, these are not exactly the same standards for licensing, so it's hard to be able to gauge this is how much it would cost me to move over to Power BI Premium. But Microsoft has stated that they are planning to implement a plan to address the cost transitions. And for now, Microsoft recommends to just get kind of like a rough ballpark of how many users will be accessing your content, so you can kind of at least get an idea of how much it would cost to, shift over to Power BI Premium fully. So, future roadmap, like I said, Microsoft is working on a plan to address the differences in billing, and they're trying to, as much as possible, reduce the amount of manual steps that are required for actually migrating over, which I'm going to touch on, in the next section of this presentation. Just in the future, Microsoft just keeps pushing for Power BI Premium, you guys. They keep investing more in the service and promoting it across their whole organization for everyone. They're like, look at all these new features we keep pushing. Don't you guys want to get involved? I mean, it really is astounding, right? All right, so in this next section, I'm going to kind of talk about the migration proper. Just off the bat, a few prerequisites before you deploy over. You, of course, first need access to the Azure portal and the analysis service model in question. And you need the login credentials for your backend data source. On the Power BI side, you need to make sure the workspace is running on a dedicated capacity. You need to make sure that the XMLA endpoint is enabled for your entire organization. And so when I say that, I mean going into the admin portal, like in the second screenshot here, and going into the capacity settings and selecting rewrite for the XMLA endpoint. And before we really dive deep into the options for deploying your model over to Power BI Premium, there's a couple of considerations on the reporting side just to keep in mind after you do migrate. And so after you do migrate, you cannot change the report's connection, like for an existing report. So if you had a report that was previously based on an analysis service model, you can't just like flip the switch and switch that over to the new Power BI data set. But there are some external hot swap tools or hot swap scripts that you could custom come in and do that if you really needed to. Another thing to consider is that you need to have the security role of an admin member or contributor to be able to publish data sets to a workspace. So before you do anything, make sure you have your access configured correctly. Another thing to note is that Power BI Premium cannot be used as a workspace server for SQL Server data tools, and that's SSDT development. So if you make a project using SSDT, it doesn't support composite models within the same model either. Another thing to just keep in mind is that any report that's built on a data set that has been deployed with the XMLA endpoint cannot be subsequently downloaded as a PBIX file. So you'll have to keep that in mind if you start using the XMLA endpoint. People are like, why can I not download the PBIX anymore? Just know that that's not supported anymore. All right, now I'm gonna kind of give an overview of your options that you have available for deploying your model into a Power BI Premium workspace. And that's what I mean by deploying, migrating. That would be what I mean by that, just so we're on the same page here. So there's several different options, but I'm just going to cover a few today. The one that I recommend most highly is Tabular Editor. It allows you to more specifically come in and control what objects and what options you're going to have when you deploy your model. And with Tabular Editor, you can take advantage of the best practice analyzer to be able to not only just deploy your model, but, you know, come in and improve your model, if you will, before you deploy it. You can also use Visual Studio as another, like those are my top two I would recommend, I think. Visual Studio is similar, but when you use Visual Studio, that overwrites everything that has been deployed previously. So you need to really keep that in mind if there are like small differences between the Visual Studio dataset and the production dataset that you're deploying into. But you can also use the BISM normalizer extension on top of Visual Studio, and that will give you a similar experience to using Tabular Editor. It will come in and allow you to configure certain deployment options before you complete the deployment. So the first option, my favorite option, is Tabular Editor. That'll allow things like metadata edits, and it will extend features that were previously in Analysis Services over to Power BI Desktop. So first of all, the first thing you want to do is get your server name by going into the Azure portal and going to the resource and getting this. Here it's listed as the management server name. And then you're going to download Tabular Editor and open it up and come to the top and click File, Open, and from Database. And next we're going to connect that tabular server that we just found. Click OK. And then we're going to choose the necessary database here. And once you reach this screen, notice that it has a section for the compatibility level right here. And you need to make sure that is 1500 or higher to be able to align with Power BI Premium. All we mean by the compatibility level is that's just a way of like labeling which behaviors are specific to each new release of the analysis service engine. And so like with 1500, those features include things like the calculation groups, the many-to-many relationships, and support for Power BI Premium. Just a side note, you can check this level within SSMS by right-clicking on the server name and going into the properties, and it will show you the supported compatibility level for that data. And then from there, it's really simple. Just come to the top and click Deploy. And deploying it to Power BI, you just paste the workspace connection to your premium workspace. And if you want to find how you want to find that connection string, you can come into Power BI service and go to that workspace, and that information is available as the workspace connection there, and you can just easily connect or copy that to your clipboard and paste it over in the Tabular Editor wizard here. And then you just keep going through the wizard. It's very user-friendly, especially if you've never done it before. You can just, come in and choose the destination you want to deploy into. And that can either be a workspace, it can either be a model that's already existing in your workspace, or you can make a new one, just type in what you want right there. And here it is, you guys. Here's the defining feature for using Tabular Editor. You can come in and select which elements you want to deploy in that model. So if you check the box for deploying model structure, that will protect against overwriting partitions if you're moving into that. You can also select to deploy the connections and the partitions roles or role numbers. finally, before you click deploy, thankfully it will give you this option to nicely review everything you did to make sure you didn't do anything wrong. And then you click deploy. And after you deploy that, just know that you've deployed just the metadata to Power BI. So in your workspace, it's going to appear just as a data set with no reports attached to it yet. But you need to come into that data set and enter the gateway and the data source credentials for that data set and make sure you push a refresh of that data set. And after you do that, you can come in and live connect to the data set and build your reports based on that data. Just briefly, I'll touch on Visual Studio. Like I said, if you use Visual Studio, it overwrites everything that is previously deployed. And for example, if there are like partitions within your production tables that are not in the Visual Studio dataset, then the tool will overwrite those partitions when you deploy that Visual Studio dataset. But the process for using Visual Studio is very simple. You just open the project in Visual Studio, and in the right-hand Explorer, just right-click the project name and click Deploy. And like I said, you can download the BISM normalizer, and that will give you a very similar to experience to what I was demoing with Tabular Editor. It's a very easy way to get a visual comparison between the source and the target data sets. And there are other features that are included with the BISM normalizer that are really worthwhile, like using database compare and code merging, being able to reuse definitions across the models that you're deploying. Here's like a little graphic for using Visual Studio. It's very simple. And like I have just a useful aside here while we're here is before you like click OK and everything, change the processing option to do not process. So that way the tool doesn't try to process the tables while you're deploying it. And that could be obviously very time consuming depending on the number of tables within your model. So that is something, that's a tick for Visual Studio here. You can come in and configure that setting. Another option would be using the ALM toolkit. And so the ALM toolkit, like I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, is an external tool for Power BI desktop. And first you would just want to make sure you open the Power BI file in the desktop and go to that external tool tab and click the ALM toolkit. And from there, you just make sure that the file is selected and enter the workspace connection string and the dataset name. And similar here, you can come in and view the differences between your reports and compare changes. You can specify not to overwrite partitions as well. Briefly, you can also use SSMS to deploy. And I think using SSMS as an option over these other options, that's going to be useful if you're just, you're comfortable using SSMS and you don't want to go in and use another tool. You can just as easily come in and do it with SSMS. So when you open up SSMS, you can click connect and connect to a server, change the server type to Analysis Services, and put the workspace connection string for the server name here, and choose the Azure Active Directory with MFA authentication method. And like once you click next, you'll be able to enter your organizational username and password and click connect there. And when you open it up like this, you can actually just come in and query against any Power BI data set like this if you wanted to, but specifically for deploying here, you're going to come in and expand the databases section, and all the data sets that are existing in that workspace appear as databases. And you can expand the tables to view the tables within those data sets. And to deploy, you'll just right click on the database name and click Process Database right here. And yeah, a useful option you have here with SSMS is you could come in and process just a specific table if you wanted to. So you could just right click that table name and process that table, and that will just allow you to just get finer down into the details of your deployment here. Oh wait, you guys, there's more. It's like Inception. We can even go deeper with SSMS. If we right click a table name, we can come and view the partitions within that table. You can manage the partitions. So say you have like incremental refresh setup, you could come in and view all of those partitions by date and process each of those separately if you wanted to. You just click this green circular arrows icon to be able to process just that specific partition. Just a side note, if you are working in Power BI and you have incremental refresh and you need to troubleshoot why a specific partition is refreshing slowly or something, you could come in and view the partitions here and troubleshoot if you needed. But that's just a side note. Fun fact. So in conclusion, I think migrating your analysis service model over to Power BI Premium offers enhanced performance capabilities and just reduces a lot of manual overhead that you can either automate or you can just find a more efficient way to work around. And Power BI Premium is just becoming this superset of everything that was great about analysis services. And by moving over, you can harness Microsoft's new innovative features and leverage this new flexible scaling structure of the architecture to really, really forge like a modern business intelligence environment for your organization.
Mm. Thank you, Elayne. That's
Thank
it,
you guys.
I guess.
Yeah.
Got it. So we have a question here, and I kind of responded to that, but I wanted to get your opinion as well. Mm-hmm. So were you involved in a project when you had to migrate a lot of analysis services models to Power BI? And did you have a tool, or did you write a script to automate that?
Just me personally, I only have experience modeling or migrating a single model over. But I know some users in my organization have scripted, multiple deployments over. But that's something I would have to do some more research into. But just right off the bat, I've never done that.
It'll be interesting if you can share some code, or maybe ask them at a high level, what kind of tool they use. I mentioned here that you can write like a .NET code that actually talks to uses something called tabular object model to kind of automate that. But it'll be interesting to see what you guys have done. I personally, just like you, haven't had this scenario to have like a mass migration. But some organizations might have. Cool. So the other question is about partitions. When you talk about partitioning, so you were talking about Azure Analysis Services tables being partitioned, right? And then moving those to Power BI. So that's what you mean by partitions, right?
Right.
Okay. Cool. Let's see what else we've got here. Oh, you were demonstrating tabular editor version 2 point something instead of 3. Have you used the third version?
I have not used the third version. I'm only familiar with the second version, but I know the third version is paid. Correct.
Yep. Correct. That's exactly what I mentioned. Starting, Daniel, who actually wrote this, it's an MVP, decided to get some money. So he decided basically to charge for the third edition. So second edition, though, still works pretty well. So he's planning to maintain like 2 branches. So there is another question.
Don't knock my second edition. I love the second edition.
Yeah, that one probably will remain, hopefully will remain free. So how do
Yeah.
they look like in Power BI? I mean, partitions. We don't have such a concept in Power BI, right? So maybe do you want to answer this? And maybe I can provide some context. He's asking, what do you mean by partitions? In Power BI, we don't have partitions, right?
Yeah, what do you mean by that? Could you kind of?
Yeah, maybe I'll just say a few words here. So Kriparam, I hope you pronounce your name right. So Power BI is analysis services. When you deploy a data set, that becomes a database in analysis services. So think of it like the highest SKU of analysis services. So Microsoft has SQL Server analysis services, but that kind of changes every, I don't know, couple of years. I don't know when the next version is going to be, probably next year or something, or maybe this. Then we have Azure Analysis, which is kind of caught in the middle between the hard rock and what was the saying, hard place, and because it's kind of probably won't get much attention moving forward because all the effort, all the attention has been shifted to Power BI. And then you've got Power BI. So if you look at the versions of this product, Power BI has the highest version, has the latest features and all that stuff, like a hybrid table, composite models that no other SKU has. So there are partitions. The only problem is that if you use Power BI Desktop, then you cannot get access to this feature. So for example, when it comes to partitioning, the only thing that Power BI Desktop supports is something called incremental refresh. So maybe at this point, I can show you a little bit here of a demo to make sure that you guys can relate to what I'm talking about. So here I've got a data set. I'm going to go to external tools. I'm going to actually connect this to Tabular Editor. So Tabular Editor, which is what Elayne was talking about, is a community tool which allows you to do very cool things. If you kind of follow my presentations on this subject, I'm kind of a big fan of Tabular Editor. I don't like Power BI Desktop all that much because it gets slow. Every change you make requires a commit to the database. Whereas this tool, Tabular Editor, is meta-driven only. So I can make changes. In fact, I can script changes here. Let's say if I want to rename a bunch of measures, or if I want to change the formula in a bunch of measures, I have a scripting capabilities, which are very cool. But then if we go to the tables here section, which shows the same tables that we have in Power BI Desktop, is just a different tool to get to your model that you build in Power BI Desktop. And if we start expanding these tools, then we see partitions right here. So the partitions are here. As we can see now, all tables have just one partition. So there is nothing stopping me from this point on actually to go ahead and create additional partitions, just like I can do in Visual Studio. Or in fact, I can get innovative and use this hybrid new partition. So I can put some partitions in direct query, some partitions in imported mode, just to take advantage of all these new features that we have in Power BI Premium, but not in the other SKUs. And then I can go ahead and one caveat here, though, is that the moment, as I mentioned before, Power BI Desktop, the only thing Power BI Desktop recognizes as a partitioning is something called incremental refresh. So the moment I start creating my own partitions, then at least currently, at least today, you have to kiss Power BI Desktop goodbye. Because the moment I save this back to Power BI Desktop, Power BI Desktop essentially, when you save it from there, it's going to remove all the things that doesn't recognize, including, unfortunately, partitions. So this is you can still do your partitioning, but you've got to use either tabular editor or SSDT in Visual Studio, which was what Elayne was talking about. Of course, my preferred tool is tabular editor. The moment you start doing custom partitions, though, you cannot use Power BI Desktop anymore. So that will be another reason to be careful about. You can use all other features that Power BI Desktop supports. You can create measures, you can create calculated columns quickly in Tabular Editor. Then when you go and save, then those changes are going to be they're going to be applied to your Power BI. So you can kind of use the two tools interchangeably. But partitions is one example that we do not, Power BI Desktop does not support it. So they're going to be erased if you continue using Power BI Desktop. Does that make sense? Hope it does. Let's see what else we've got here. Got it. Thank you so much. Absolutely right. Okay. Any other questions? So any questions to Elayne, me, about her presentation or anything Microsoft BI or Power BI related? I guess we don't have, so we're going to finish earlier today. People are saying great present. Okay, so there is a table from Lance. Lance, will hybrid tables be supported in Power BI Desktop? So the hybrid tables, Lance, they, again, the only thing that Power BI Desktop recognize as far as, okay, so before that, let me just explain for those of you who haven't followed Power BI what a hybrid table is. So a hybrid table is a combination. Imagine, so there are a couple of scenarios where hybrid tables could be useful, but the most common scenario in my opinion would be you have a very large table and you don't want to fit the entire table into memory, because if you do, you're going to be, it's going to take a lot of memory. You're going to find yourself, you have to move to the next Power BI premium plan or whatever licensing you use. So it's a huge table. So what you want to do, but then when you talk to users, you come with a compromise. The last 6 months maybe are hot. We want to have the best performance. And historical data, we probably won't access them all that often. So maybe historical data, we can tolerate some performance delay, right? So then you say, good. Now what I can do, I can actually create 2 partitions in my table at minimum, right? You can say the last 6 months will be imported, and the historical data would be in direct query. So hybrid tables are a relatively new feature currently in preview that allows me to have hybrid storage mode within the same table. So back to what Lance was asking. Will Power BI Desktop support them? The only thing that Power BI Desktop supports today is, as I mentioned, as far as partitioning, is incremental refresh. So in incremental refresh actually is designed, there is a, if you go there in the latest version of Power BI Desktop, if you go to incremental refresh, you will see that there is a new checkbox for hybrid tables. So that scenario is the opposite of what I just described. That scenario is meant for, let's say, my data is imported, but I want the latest data to be available for reporting as soon as the changes are made. So kind of a real-time BI, the hybrid between importing let's say the model overnight, But instead of waiting for the next refresh, I want changes that are happening right now in the database to be automatically reflected, to be available for reporting. So it's reversed because now we are saying, okay, when we refresh the data set, then the data is going to be imported, but everything that happens after the refresh date is going to be in direct query. So that scenario still uses hybrid tables. This is the only option that is supported today. If you want to do my scenario, the one that I mentioned before, where the historical data is in direct query, we cannot do it in Power BI Desktop today. So we have to go and create our own partitions, which automatically means what? Automatically means kissing Power BI Desktop goodbye because it doesn't support custom partition designs. So the answer to the convoluted answer to the last question is you cannot do it right now unless you do incremental refresh. Hopefully, at some point, Microsoft will honor custom partitions in Power BI Desktop, maybe even further, allow us to partition it right there. But at this point, that's the situation. And there is another question in here. With direct query, Nitin is asking, with direct query mode, we lose some DAX functions. Does this hybrid table will work and override such exceptions? With direct query mode, we lose some DAX functions. Does the hybrid table, okay. So the hybrid table, if you're familiar with composite models, the hybrid tables have the same limitations. So because the direct query partition, as Nitin is mentioning, because direct query in Power BI Desktop has limitations, obviously these limitations are going to be carried to a hybrid table because of one of the partitions is direct query. The limitations are not so many. The calculated columns that reference other tables, for example, being one, you cannot direct query doesn't support it. But I personally try to stay away from calculated columns as much as I want. I use SQL views to create my extending columns and stuff like that. I usually works better not only for this scenario, but just in general. Other than that, you really have to test and see if you run across some features that are not supported. I think that most of them at this point should be supported, Nitin. Do you have any particular function in mind that is not supported?
Time intelligence.
Time intelligence, like year to date, quarter to date?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure those were supported, right? I mean, and they still not supported? I thought that we supported them.
Yeah, I think there are YTD and calculations, DAX functions in the direct query mode. It won't. It need to be.
Doesn't fold.
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, exactly. The query folding doesn't work. So at least that's what earlier was. If it has changed, I haven't recently used those functions. I take care of during the modeling itself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Limited data transformation. So I know the data transformations are limited in Power Query, but year to date, time calculations, dead time support only to second accuracy, limitations in calculated. I thought it was we support them in direct query, I know they were not supported in the past, but I think we do. So I might want to check on that and see. Next, as the direct query is involved. Okay, Stacy Jones, actually Stacy replies. Okay, thank you, Stacy. Direct query. Next, as the direct query is involved in all scenarios, you should be aware of all the general limitations that apply to direct query mode. That means not complex Power Query transformation, tax calculations. Yeah, exactly what I was saying. Yep. Yep. Any other questions? Somebody sharing the ultimate guide. Yeah, this is how it uses, how it works. Cool. What it looks like we are don't have any questions. Elayne, thank you so much. Again,
Thank you
definitely
guys for
have
having
you.
me.
Yeah, definitely will have you again. Good luck with your career.
Thank you, you guys as well.
And guys, I guess I'll see you the next meeting, which is April 4th, I believe, first Monday of the next month. Other than that, stay safe and take care. Have a great evening.
Thank you all, you too.